Greetings everyone, it's time for one of Skyrim's biggest mysteries to be solved. In this video, I will reveal the mother of each of Jarl Balgruuf's children after a decade of Skyrim. Firstly, thank you to everyone that has subscribed thus far, and if you haven't yet, then I hope to earn your subscription with this video. The channel has come so far in only a few months, and I plan to keep growing. You may have noticed me kinda testing the water with different video ideas, so I'd appreciate it if you guys would let me know what you like and what you don't like about my channel in the comments to give me an idea of what direction to go in. Do you like the entertainment videos, or would you rather I just stick to video games or even just Bethesda? Let me know below. Now for the main event. Who is the mother of each of Jarl Balgruuf's children? Bethesda is notorious for hiding secrets like this within their games, which their fans love. I don't believe that they have a concrete answer for every single mystery, but I strongly believe that this mystery has an answer for a few reasons. Firstly, there's a significant amount of dialogue that provides a few vague details on the subject, aka hints. Second, a few months back, Todd Howard hosted an AMA on Reddit and someone asked him, quote, "Who is the mother of Jarl Balgruuf's children?" And Todd Howard responded, quote, "He's not talking," and he included a link to an image of Balgruuf sitting on his throne. While he didn't say much, the fact that he chose to respond to this question says it all. There is an answer. There were a lot of good questions asked, but he only responded to a few, including that one. So I believe that there is an answer to this mystery, and that I've uncovered that answer. And this mystery is terrific, really an Agatha Christie caliber mystery, and it took a lot of digging and careful observation to figure all this out. But after a long process of gathering information about Balgruuf, his children, and the whole situation, and making calculated assumptions based on that information, and finally combining that with certain development decisions that Bethesda made, I've come up with an explanation that adds up too nicely to be wrong. As some of you may have surmised, I hid a few hints of my own in the promotional clip I've been showing leading up to this. I was always very careful in my wording for the big question. Who is or are the mother or mothers of Jarl Balgruuf's children? This wording leaves room for the possibility of all of them not having the same mom, which I believe to be the case. Now, Keir supports this theory when he tells the player that the Whispering Lady, aka Mephala, told him that he does not have the same mother as his siblings, which we'll talk more about in a bit. The subscriber that initially asked me about Balgruuf's children also asked me a very keen question after I agreed to eventually do this video. Is the answer a popular theory? Well, the answer also pertains to my wording, mother or mothers. Guess what? It is mothers. I believe that Balgruuf has children with two women, one of which is a popular theory and the other is not. Let's start with the popular theory and do the major shocking reveal that will change your Skyrim playing experience forever after that. One quest that many fans have pointed to in regards to Balgruuf's children is the Whispering Door. To begin this quest, the player must ask Balgruuf about rumors regarding his children. He tells the player that his youngest child, Nalkir, has changed a lot recently and he doesn't know why. As it turns out, the Ebony Blade has found its way into Dragonsreach along with its master, the Daedric Prince of Secrets, Mephala, and Mephala has been speaking to Nalkir and telling him secrets. One of these secrets is that Nalkir doesn't have the same mother as his siblings. Some may ask, well, why assume that Mephala is telling him the truth? Well, there's more to deception than simply lying. Straightforward, just saying things that are false tends to be how bad deceivers operate, while good deceivers tend to base most of what they say in truth and only lie when absolutely necessary. They also often tell partial truths. So what I'm saying is, I'm inclined to think that Mephala, the Daedric Prince of Secrets, is too clever to rely on lies as her primary tool to mislead others. I think the secrets that she told Nalkir are true, but she hasn't given him the whole story, which is typical of a good deceiver. So what's Mephala not telling Nalkir? Let's examine this line again. See how while Nalkir is stuttering, he says that Well, based on the information he ends up giving us, I feel pretty safe assuming that he was about to say that I'm a bastard. So why is this important? Because it tells us that Balgruuf either was or maybe still is married. Yet now, there's no spouse to be found in Dragonsreach, nor is one ever mentioned. I think that Balgruuf was happily married to Hrofar and Dagny's mother, and that Mephala spun some of her webs of deceit and got Balgruuf to cheat on his wife, resulting in his mistress becoming pregnant with Nelkir. So Mephala isn't telling Nelkir that she had a hand in bringing him into existence, and maybe she has a plan for him. Mephala messing with Balgruuf and his family could be part of what Irileth means when she mentions attacks on the Jarl's sanity. When I first heard that line, I was like, that's a curious thing to say. Then when I started putting all these pieces together, I was like, this could be what she means. Before I go on, there's an important thing to note. The Ebony Blade, which is the epicenter of Mephala's influence in Dragon's Reach, is locked away with a journal called Admonition Against Ebony. The contents reveal that the executives of Dragon's Reach know that the blade corrupts and exploits people's desires in order to use them. This is important because this tells us that at some point the higher-ups in Dragon's Reach realized that the Ebony Blade was the source of the trouble. Hence, I think at some point while Mephala was spinning her webs to cause trouble between Balgruuf and his wife, they realized that the Ebony Blade was somehow influencing them. But how and when did they come to this realization? Well, the Ebony Blade's whole shtick is that it rewards the wielder for killing people that trust them. And more simply, when do you use a sword? When you're going to kill someone. So I bet that sometime after Nelkir's birth, either Balgruuf or his wife used the Ebony Blade to kill his mother. Why? Well, maybe if it was Balgruuf, he wanted to prove his loyalty to his wife, and if it was her, maybe it was some sort of revenge for violating her marriage. Another possible motive for both of them is maybe to hide the fact that Nelkir is a bastard. After all, it certainly seems like they never intended for Nelkir to find out, since Mephala's the one that told him. Whatever the case, afterward the people involved realized that the Ebony Blade had somehow caused the whole thing. Perhaps Mephala said something upon the kill, like she does when the player kills someone with the Ebony Blade, or maybe Farengar just examined it afterward and determined this thing is enchanted by a Daedra. Either way, we know that the result was they locked it away and wrote the admonition against Ebony. Now, what happened to Nelkir's mom's body? It's not like Balgruuf and his wife could just let people know that they killed someone to cover up an affair. So what became of the body? Well, as a matter of fact, there is a skeleton hidden underneath the bridge to Dragon's Reach, which I believe is the remains of Nelkir's mother. Could be that the murder took place on the bridge. Maybe she tried to run away, possibly with Nelkir, and she got stabbed in the back with the Ebony Blade. This skeleton is a pretty common guess for one of the mothers, and it fits with the narrative we've gathered here. As for who she was, I'm thinking she was probably just a servant at Dragon's Reach. The room that the Ebony Blade is found in may have been her bedroom. So it seems like Mephala has plans for Nelkir, and she's not telling him about her hand in his birth nor her hand in his mother's death because she wants to use him as an agent of some kind. So that's the popular theory. Now it's time for the big, shocking reveal that will change your experience playing Skyrim forever. Who is Balgruuf's aforementioned wife, Hrofar and Dagny's mother? We still have unanswered questions. How did Mephala's influence get into Dragon's Reach in the first place? Why is Balgruuf's wife nowhere to be found? And why is her identity kept a secret? Well, guess what? One character makes all of this make sense, so allow me to explain why I am convinced that Dagny and Hrofar's mother is Delphine. Yes, that's right. The answer that you've been waiting for is that the Blade in the Dark and friend to the Dragonborn throughout the main questline is or was married to Jarl Balgruuf and is Hrofar and Dagny's mom. First, I'll tell you the story I've gathered about how they came to be married, then I'll get into the concrete evidence. So when I was getting started investigating this, I began by narrowing down the kind of woman that would make sense as someone Balgruuf would have married. He seems to be about Ulfric's age, so I'm thinking he's somewhere in his 50s and we can assume his wife would be too. We know from this dialogue that he served in the Legion. It's not confirmed whether or not he's a Great War veteran, but I think that his whole deal with being torn about what side to pick in Skyrim's Civil War makes a lot more sense and forms a better story if he did fight in the Great War as opposed to if he didn't. Though it doesn't really matter because we know that he was in the Legion for a time when he was younger, likely before he was married with kids. and therefore would have worked closely with other legionnaires and perhaps had some level of contact with the Blades. So it's entirely possible that he and his wife met during his time in the Legion. After all, he would be about the age that someone would be when they're looking to get married. So once I got a list of candidates together, I looked it over and stopped on Delphine's name because suddenly it occurred to me and I was like, wait, she has a scene in Dragon's Reach and they're in the same room at the War Council. So I started trying to connect more dots with her and ended up with a story that makes a whole lot of sense and explains a number of things. After I had connected enough dots, I determined that I had my answer. So let's start with the Ebony Blade. Its last known wielder was the hero of Kvatch, yet now it's locked in a room within Dragon's Reach. How could it have gotten there? We know from certain Daedric quests that Daedra can't just teleport their artifacts, at least not from within Mundus. They have to have them in their possession to teleport them to your inventory, or you need to go get them from somewhere in Mundus. First, let's make some observations about this unique sword. It's not just any sword, it's a Daikatana, and the only one within the base game of Skyrim, though in Oblivion it was a common weapon to be used by the Blades. Some may point out that the Ebony Blade was a one-handed katana in Oblivion, but when it comes to Daedric artifacts, I think it's safe to assume that their Daedra masters can alter them. The admonition states that the hottest fires of the Skyforge couldn't smelt it down, but I think that Mephala herself probably can will it to be altered, or maybe it grew as a result of killing Nelkir's mom. After all, its whole deal is that it gets more powerful every time someone uses it to kill a person that trusts them, so maybe once Nelkir's mom was killed, it got so powerful that it grew. Though I think that Bethesda merely made it a Daikatana in Skyrim as a hint. They want us to think, where have we seen Daikatanas before? Now let me ask you this, to practice using an Xbox controller, would you go to a trainer that uses a PlayStation controller? Probably not, so to practice using a weapon like the Ebony Blade, I find it very likely that the hero of Kvatch would have trained with his fellow Blades at Cloud Ruler Temple, so he very well may have kept a few weapons there, especially the katanas like the Ebony Blade and Goldbrand, and when the hero of Kvatch ascended to become the new Sheogorath, I believe he left those weapons behind, and eventually they just got mixed in with the other katanas at Cloud Ruler Temple, and after a while, I believe that the Ebony Blade fell into the hands of none other than Delphine, which fits with the contents of Thalmor Dossier Delphine saying that she was stationed in Cyrodiil for a time. She probably picked it up not knowing what it was and just kept it. As a side note, this idea with the hero of Kvatch leaving his katanas at Cloud Ruler Temple can also explain why Boethia doesn't award Goldbrand for completing Boethia's calling. Maybe another blade ended up with Goldbrand and therefore Boethia doesn't have Goldbrand to give you. Back to Delphine, after Cloud Ruler Temple fell during the Great War, Delphine fled north into Skyrim, and she found shelter with an old friend that she met when he was a legionnaire and she was stationed in Cyrodiil, now Balgruuf the Greater, Jarl of Whiterun. Where better to hide from the Thalmor at that time than a Jarl's palace? Little did they know, Delphine had brought another threat into Dragon's Reach. She brought with her the Ebony Blade, which provided Mephala with a conduit with which to influence them. At some point, they got married and had Frofar and Dagny. Then Mephala started spinning her webs to disrupt their happiness, and the events that we discussed earlier took place, leading to the death of Nelkir's mother. However, I don't think that Delphine left immediately following that incident. First, we know that at some point they figured out that the Ebony Blade was somehow corrupting and exploiting their desires and feelings. So Delphine likely blamed the sword rather than Balgruuf for the affair. Second, there's more to be considered than just her relationship with Balgruuf. She may have stayed for her kids. And third, at that point in time, it's not like there was a safer place for her to go. Remember, she's being hunted by the Thalmor, so a Jarl's Palace is the place for her to be. So why did Delphine eventually leave? Well, in my experience, there's rarely one reason for a breakup. I think that the affair was likely the first nail in the coffin, but it certainly wasn't the last one. So I have two more possible reasons that she could have left to share. Firstly, they may have had conflicting opinions about the rising tension in Skyrim that ultimately led led to the Civil War. I think that they feel very differently about Ulfric Stormcloak, and that may have been the cause of some arguments. During the War Council, Ulfric addresses Delphine by name, clearly implying that they know each other, probably from the Great War. Like we discussed earlier, we don't know if Balgruuf was in the Great War, but we do know that he was in the Legion, knows Ulfric, and he seems to be around the same age as Delphine and Ulfric. So Delphine may have served the Empire, but after all, so did Ulfric, Galmar, and many of the Stormcloaks, and she's also a very pious Talos worshipper, as many Blades are. So it stands to reason that she may have some level of sympathy or agreement for the Stormcloaks' cause, though she's probably not a full-fledged supporter because she knows that the Thalmor are benefiting from this war and suspects that they are masterminding it. Regardless, one thing we do know is that Balgruuf is not a fan of Ulfric. So, when the Markarth incident occurred, maybe Delphine expressed some level of support and Balgruuf said, no, that stupid fool is going to get the Thalmor more involved in Skyrim. This tension may have led to arguments and may have caused Balgruuf to get a bit jealous of Ulfric. So this very well could have been the second nail in the coffin. Here, Gerder mentions that Balgruuf and Ulfric have been at odds for years, so it could be that Delphine's opinion of Ulfric has contributed to Balgruuf's spite towards him. This notion of conflicting opinions about the current events of Skyrim is also supported by one of Delphine's dialogues. Here, she expresses disapproval toward the Greybeards for their lack of action. She says, if you live in fear of what might go wrong, you'll end up doing nothing. She may be talking about the Greybeards, but who else sits on a mountain doing nothing, perhaps out of fear of what might go wrong? Balgruuf does. So she may be directing some of her angst for Balgruuf at the Greybeards here. Next, I have a more practical reason for why Delphine could have left Balgruuf. Regardless of their opinions about it, the Thalmor did end up getting more involved in Skyrim, which would be a big problem for Blades in hiding there. Thalmor troops marching around Skyrim arresting people would have made Delphine a much bigger security risk to her family and the others at Dragon's Reach than she was when she initially moved in. If the Thalmor had managed to track her down, it would have put Balgruuf and their kids in danger. Balgruuf's housecarl Irileth takes security very seriously, as is evident in a lot of her dialogue. So it could be that at some point Irileth asked Delphine to leave because of the risk to the Jarl and the kids. It's also entirely possible that Delphine simply left on her own accord. It's not like she wants to put her family in danger. So Delphine being a security risk to her family, I'm thinking was the last nail in the coffin and ultimately is the reason why she left. Now some concrete evidence from in-game. Really folks, this evidence is what I initially found that made me think I was on the right track with Delphine and I kinda formed the narrative parts around it, but for the sake of filmmaking I thought it best to place this part here. After retrieving the Dragonstone from Bleak Falls Barrow, the player returns to Farengar and finds him speaking with Delphine. She is in disguise because the Blades are wanted by the Thalmor, so she must be discreet. Once their business is concluded, she sees herself out. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Wrong. Let's pause here for a moment. What if I told you that for the past 10 years, Bethesda has had Skyrim players completely fooled about what's happening in this scene? Well, guess what? They have. Let's rewind and see what's really going on here. Upon arriving, Farengar and Delphine are talking about dragons. When Delphine sees the player, she says, "We have a visitor." She is indeed wearing a hood to obscure her identity, and it is reasonable to assume that she's afraid of the Thalmor somehow finding her. However, there's a big problem with that. There are other scenes in which it would be logical for her to have that same fear, thinking the Thalmor might find her. However, she's not wearing a hood in those scenes. Firstly, during the quest A Blade in the Dark at Kynesgrove, she is under the impression that the Thalmor may have something to do with the dragons returning, yet she doesn't wear a hood. Also at Katla's farm, which is in Haafingar, where the Thalmor have a strong presence, she is not wearing a hood there either. So why is she going this extra mile to disguise herself in Dragon's Reach? Well, she's not avoiding the Thalmor. What's going on here is she's avoiding being spotted by Balgruuf and certain people close to him. Why? Because they're on awkward terms regarding the breakup. And like I said before, she's a security risk to her family there, so to avoid the possibility of being seen by Balgruuf or anyone close to him, she's wearing a hood. There is further confirmation that this is the case because that possibility of being spotted by someone comes to fruition. After giving them the Dragonstone, Delphine briefly compliments the player, then Irileth arrives urgently looking for Farengar. Now, I've run this test many times, folks, and every time Delphine turns her head away from Irileth, then bolts without a proper goodbye. If pursued, she'll kind of shrug you off, trying not to draw attention. Remember, when the player gets there, she just says, "We have a visitor," so she's totally cool with the player being there, but the second Irileth gets there, she turns her head and bolts. Why? Because Irileth knows who she is and that she's not supposed to be there, but the player doesn't. This is very consistent with what we said earlier about Irileth possibly asking Delphine to leave due to the security risk she poses. Also, in regards to this scene, Farengar makes perfect sense as a person who wouldn't care one way or the other about the breakup, because he's not so directly involved with the family. Also, he tends to see things like that as petty and beneath him. In addition to her hood and avoidance of Irileth, there's also another thing about this scene that's been overlooked for a decade, and that's the positioning of Balgruuf and his children. Balgruuf is normally in his throne or idling around, yet in this scene Bethesda has gone an extra mile to make sure that he's placed back here. Why? Because Delphine is here, and this avoids them coming into contact with each other. And where are the children for all of this? During this transition between Bleak Falls Barrow and Dragon Rising, the children are nowhere to be found in the main hall, regardless of what time it is. After some searching, I found them crowded in their room and just outside of it, and they don't move from here until Dragon Rising is complete. Why? It's not like they're safer here than anywhere else during a dragon attack. Yet Bethesda has gone to a lot of trouble to make sure that they stay here during these events. Why? Because they don't want Frofar and Dagny to be in the same room as their mother. Bethesda wanted this mystery to be solvable, so they constructed this transition between Bleak Falls Barrow and Dragon Rising very carefully to give us clues that for 10 years no one has noticed until now. There's also something I want to point out about when Farengar initially gives the quest Bleak Falls Barrow. If asked how he got this information, he says, "Must preserve some professional secrets, mustn't we?" Given Delphine's circumstances, it does make sense to speak of her covertly, but this doesn't really make sense with the scene when the player returns with the Dragonstone. Delphine is totally cool with the player being there, and Farengar freely confirms that she is his source. So I think there's another reason why Farengar doesn't say who his source is here. Look who's standing here. Balgruuf. Farengar doesn't want to say that it's Delphine in front of Balgruuf, perhaps because he doesn't want to reopen old wounds, or maybe he's not supposed to be talking to Delphine because of the security risk. Delphine being Balgruuf's wife also explains why she currently lives in Riverwood. It's under his jurisdiction, so he can still provide her aid if necessary. Could be that he pulled some strings to help with the construction of the secret room under the inn. This leads us to another overlooked moment from earlier in the game. The player's first encounter with Balgruuf is to ask for more guards on Riverwood's behalf. Irileth says that Riverwood is in the most immediate danger, however that's not really true, is it? From the dialogues we know that Alduin was seen by multiple people flying north from Riverwood, so it seems like Whiterun and Rorikstead are in the most immediate danger, yet he sends troops to Riverwood. Well folks, I think what's going on here is that Irileth and Balgruuf know each other well enough to communicate some things non-verbally. I think that Irileth is looking at him and saying with her eyes, "We should send aid to Delphine, who's hiding in Riverwood." They may also think that the Thalmor may have some involvement with the dragons, and they know that they're after Delphine. So what they're really doing here is sending troops to protect her, at least until they figure out what's going on. The only time that Balgruuf and Delphine can be in the same room together is during Season Unending at the War Council. If this quest is done while Balgruuf is Jarl, then he will be in attendance. They never say anything to each other, likely because they can't in the presence of the Imperial delegation. For the safety of their children, they don't want anyone finding out about their past. Depending on certain choices the player makes, this council can play out very differently, but Elenwen is always there at first, and can stay the whole time. They probably don't want General Tullius to know about their past either, so they just don't cross eyes and keep very quiet in general compared to the other participants. Ultimately, I don't think there's enough here to call evidence, but I wanted to bring it up because it is the only time that they can be in the same room together. Some may say, wait, Delphine is a Breton, and in the book Notes on Racial Phylogeny it says that usually children will inherit the mother's race when it's mixed, and Dagny and Frofar are both Nords. Well, the book makes clear that there are times that elements of the father's race will be there as well. Also, it's pretty reasonable to assume that Bethesda made them all Nords so that we wouldn't be able to figure it out so easily. After all, if Dagny and Frofar were Bretons, that would narrow down who their mother is by a whole lot. Hence, I see the races of the children as not something to be considered here. Before I conclude, as an honorable mention, I want to say that there is a case to be made for Irileth being Nelkyr's mother. Firstly, she's never seen sleeping in Dragon's Reach, so some may suggest that she secretly shares a bed with Balgruuf. However, I looked around and there is an unaccounted for bed near the Whispering Door. Second, Irileth does have a deep connection with Balgruuf that she explains very vaguely, so some may question why she's so loyal to him, though I don't find it suspicious because the Jarl's housecarl is a good job, so I don't find it hard to believe that she simply is a friend and is his housecarl because it's a good gig. You don't question why Galmar is so loyal to Ulfric, or why Faline works for Jarl Igmund, or why your housecarls serve you, so I question Irileth's loyalty to Balgruuf. The last point pertains to Mephala involvement in all this. Mephala is one of the good Daedra worshipped by the Dunmer, and Irileth is a Dunmer. Some may suggest that this implies a connection between her and the Ebony Blade, but I think this is just a coincidence. Mephala seems to be looking for a more suitable pawn than Nelkyr, so if there was a connection between her and Irileth, then wouldn't she be the logical choice? So the fact that she doesn't even mention Irileth makes it seem unlikely that they are connected in some way. And with that, one of Skyrim's greatest mysteries is solved. For the reasons we've discussed, my final answer is that the skeleton under the bridge to Dragon's Reach is the remains of Nelkyr's mother, and that Delphine is Frofar and Dagny's mother. By making reasonable assumptions based on what we do know about these characters and this situation, we can put together an explanation that makes sense. It explains why the mothers' identities are kept a secret, how the Ebony Blade ended up in Dragon's Reach, why Delphine wears a hood here but not elsewhere, why Balgruuf and the kids are anchored in unusual spots during this seemingly minor transitional scene, why there's a skeleton under the bridge, and more. It all just adds up too nicely to be wrong. So after 10 years of Skyrim, I am confident that this mystery is solved. Thank you again to everyone that subscribed so far, and I hope that I've earned more subs with this video. Check out my Patreon if you're interested in getting more from my end, and thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share if you want me to solve more of Bethesda's mysteries, and see you next time.